We're going to have an academic forum connected with the a special research project. It's called Integral Theory of the Future of the European Union, and it's led by Professor Matej Aubel from New University, and it's co-financed from the Slovenian Research Agency. What we're going to do here today, we're going to talk about a special field inside this project. It's Common Defense and Security European policy. And the main point is, or the main reason why we decided to talk about was how much security or security and policy we need in Europe, like it is now. Do we need it more or we need it less? And we would like to find out how the COVID might influence the situation in the European Common Security and Defense policy. And I'm really happy to have my guests here today. I would like to make a short introduction, who they are. First of all, here is Colonel Dr. Boris Rutar from Slovenian Ministry of Defense, Slovenian Armed Forces. He has a long period of many different expertise. He's been abroad a lot. He made a lot of different jobs. And welcome, Boris, today. And
Thank
then today is with me Professor Olivera Ignatz. At the beginning, she worked at the Ministry of Interior in Montenegro for approximately 6 years, and then she made a PhD and she started to work as a professor at Faculty of Humanistics in Donja Gorica in Montenegro. And she was invited to this forum as a professor from this university. But since Friday, she's the Minister of Defense of Montenegro, so congratulations. And my first guest is Thomas Young from Post Naval School in Monterrey. He's a very, very long experience in many defense areas, but he's specialized in defense planning and defense managing. And recently, I remember something like 2 years ago, he published a book with the title Anatomy of Post-Communist European Defense Institutions. And I believe he will share some of his findings from that book also today with us. He has many personal experiences from many different countries. He's been there, he spent a lot of time there, and he knows them pretty well. You might be surprised. So at the beginning, I would like to give a word to Thomas Young. So welcome, Thomas. Can you share some thoughts connected with our topic today, please?
Sure. I'm happy to be here, as a matter of fact. It's early here in Monterey, but that's quite all right. I always enjoy working with my colleagues in Central and Eastern Europe, and I have a particular affection for Slovenia, first having gone there in 1994. So we have a long history together. Liliana has asked me to answer 2 questions, and I'm going to answer those questions quickly, and then I'm going to move on to another issue that relates to it, which gets very little attention. I'm going to share this. Let me know if you can see it. Is it up on the screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay, this is from a briefing that's from an article I published last year in the Rusi Journal in London, looking at why readiness rates amongst armed forces in Central and Eastern Europe are so low. But she asked me the question, what are the implications of COVID on defense? And I've actually looked into it this past summer and fall. And much to my surprise, it's not having much of an effect at all. In fact, in a number of countries like Poland and Romania, they're actually increasing their defense budget, which is counterintuitive to what I thought would happen. But these are early years, so let's wait for next year and see what really happens. And then the second question, should the EU spend more money on defense, or should they spend more money on defense collectively? I would say an emphatically yes, and I've always said that, irrespective of the current administration in Washington. But I'm more interested in not so much how much you spend on defense, but rather what do you spend it on? And what I teach my students here and when I'm consulting abroad in ministries of defense is that, you know, a healthy defense budget should be in thirds. A third to investment, a third to personnel, and a third to operations and maintenance. Once you fall out of that division, something gets unbalanced. So you're spending too much money on procurement, you're not spending money on training. You're spending too much money on personnel, you're not doing procurement and training. Very few countries in Central and Eastern Europe are anywhere close to that one third, one third, one third. So I would say that if you don't find that crucial balance, and Minister Injak, I would say this goes for Montenegro as it does for every country in the region, what you will find out is that you will have capability in coherence. I'm happy to say I haven't seen that in Montenegro with the purchase of the 412 Bell helicopters, that they've been procured and the pilots are getting the requisite number of hours. So I would say congratulations. That's an exception to the rule. So you have to ask yourself, if the money isn't going to, let's say, operations and maintenance, and where is it going? Most countries in Central and Eastern Europe are nowhere close to that one third for operations and maintenance, which explains why there's very low readiness in so many forces. Armies don't train collectively, for example. And if your army isn't training collectively, you have to really ask yourself, what exactly do I have this army for? Because there's no way that army will survive on the modern battlefield. And then I use in my essay, because I was in Ljubljana and throughout Slovenia in 2018 at the invitation of General Getter, and I had a great opportunity to look at the armed forces. And I think it's a very useful case study for us to discuss here, and then I'll end. And that is, you know, if you go to the air wing at the air base that I'll never be able to pronounce, you will find that it operates, it's small, but the critical point is that it's operational. Why? Because it has a commander. It has an operations and maintenance budget. You go to Akran, you know, what do you find at the Navy? You find a Navy that's very small, but it's operational. Why? It has an operations budget, it has a commander. The Army has no Army commander. It's disaggregated. You know, in effect, 3 brigades, but 4,700 personnel. That doesn't make any sense. We have empty units here, and there's no O&M budget. Therefore, we have capability and coherence. So that's the message that I would like to share with everybody today. And I will stop here.
Okay. We will talk about the common defense and European security later on a little bit, okay? So now I would like to connect it with our topic. I would like to give a word to Dr. Rutter.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. First, let me thank New University for the opportunity to participate in this forum, and thanks to Liliana for the nice introduction. The topic of today's debate, it's really up to date. Although the question seems straightforward, it is in fact more complex and complicated. The question is not only about military expenditure, but more about defense architecture in Europe. I will, though, try to speak more about conceptual challenges in regard to European defense, if I'm allowed. But let me start with the obvious. Current pandemic we are living in is temporary. With the effective vaccine in sight, countries will soon get back to business as usual. I don't know if it's good or bad, but usually it's like this. On the other hand, the issue of defense expenditure is permanent, or at least long-lasting. Therefore, the current prevailing sentiment that governments need to invest in healthcare system rather than military will fade away soon after the end of this pandemic. The question of the security and military investment in The EU will remain, simply because this needs to be solved. It's not solved yet. Of course, bitter memories of the time of the pandemic will be there to stay and will influence future policies. But after the pandemic, EU and its member states will have to tackle other policies to include common security. Certainly, there will be some bright examples of the pandemic times. I'm referring now this to the common financing of the vaccine development as one example. But at the same time, the pandemic in Europe reminds us of the fragile foundation of the EU. And they refer EU as a bureaucracy in Brussels versus Europe as a countries and people. But let's say, talk about EU, which means immediately upon the emergence of the pandemic, all countries forgot about EU, implement their own national policies, closed borders, and did not talk to each other at all. For instance, if you can remember this purchasing of the protective mask from China and all the countries that went there. So there has been some response at EU level, but for the first few weeks, it looked that as EU does not exist. National before EU principle. This is true also in the domain of defense a little bit. The financing of the defense expenditure in Europe is still based almost exclusively on decisions made by individual nation states. Even NATO has difficulty to persuade countries to invest in defense, not to mention EU level, where defense is in fact a third-class theme. This is because EU rely heavily on NATO in its complementary role. EU is an excellent economic bloc, and EU is an excellent defense bloc. Up until NATO and EU share same values and interests, this symbiosis worked perfectly. More recently, with the emergence of the new American unilateralism, and let's say France leading the attempt for the so-called EU strategic autonomy, it has forced us all to think more thoroughly about future defense architecture in the West. The interests of NATO and EU might not be identical anymore, but are still and will remain common. At least I believe so. So as we learned recently, NATO is indispensable, but I think it needs a strong European pillar in the future. This calls for unifying defense policy at EU level. Perhaps the pandemic experiences is a good motivation for this. EU will have to solve its national peculiarities, ineffectiveness, broken chain of command, and many other things to become more solid partner. The issue of EU strategic autonomy is legitimate, but I believe it must lead to the consolidation and alteration of transatlantic tie. In more than a decade, we are talking about military expenditure, normally in the negative sense. Although every policy needs a backup in hard currency, of course, the debate about increase in defense expenditure seems to revolve exclusively around the acquisition of equipment, be it according to the wishes of the US military industrial complex or to the wishes of the EU PESCO project under the EDA. At the moment, the EU defense policy is not to create better common defense, but rather to save its defense industry. This has turned defense expenditure into an economic category. I believe that both EU and the US are spending their defense expenditure economically wisely, but politically maybe wrongly. Example are collective defense and so on. So the money is there, but it's not invested in the right domain, I think. Let me finish on the question about more or less EU in defense expenditure. I believe that the answer can only be more EU if we want to build the EU pillar of NATO. The question, of course, is what, when, and how. But there is another dimension in favor of the more defense expenditure at EU level. In my view, this could have the same effect, for example, as the euro currency in the economy. Together we will be stronger, more integrated and safer. We should not forget that the creation of the European integration was based on the prospect to secure the peace. The coal and mine were synonyms for defense, not the economy. Thank you very much for the attention, and I'm looking forward for the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Boris. Can we move now to the new Minister of Defense of Montenegro?
Good afternoon to all speakers and participants and all of us who are this afternoon on this academic forum. I'm very happy to be here, and first of all, I want to thank to my colleague and friend, Dr. Liliana Brožić, and especially to the Nova Univerza, which invited me to take part in such interesting forum. At the very beginning, I am really happy that could hear such a good previous two discussions, and especially regardless my priorities as a new or recently appointed Minister of Defense. You know, I just started yesterday, and you know, at the very beginning, Dr. Thomas Young, I must be honest, you just raised the questions which are really challenging for me, and I am really hope that we are going to have many different fields of cooperation, and especially I could see that from the point of view of researcher and academic, someone who is coming from academic community to practice, because there is probably many different topics related to the civil-military relations which could be improved in during this my engagement here at this place. For that reason, I just want to tell you my thoughts about this generally, both about the EU future defense expenditure, or let's call it our expectations or maybe predictions, if it's possible in this moment, having in mind such serious health and economic crisis, and also their reflections on many different fields. But I want to be honest at the beginning, starting from the thesis that this is a very actual topic. I find it, and not just for the EU members, but also for the non-EU member states, especially for Western Balkan countries, because we are many countries pay attention on the supports and partnership of the EU countries and NATO countries, because that's sort of a process of stabilizations which exists here in this region for at least more than 2 decades. I spread my today's short presentation or speech in 2 parts. First part is COVID-19 impact on the EU expenditures. Just try to analyze through 2 scenarios, let's call it like that, and also impact of pandemic on the future Montenegro defense expenditures, even if it's very early to have a good assessment at this moment, having in mind that I'm here just second day at this position. The impact of COVID-19 caused unprecedented global crisis, which affects not just public health, but also due to interplay of this with other challenging factors, such as from the field of economic cooperations, transitions and exchange of people and goods and services, political also, and also on the third place, but not the least important, least on the lowest level of importance, security issues. When we speak about the EU security and security of the EU member states, with regard to common understanding of threats and challenges, I find it as a crucial for understanding of this topic, because the COVID-19 and economic recession will force, in my opinion, the EU to confront its priorities in that field. Impacts of COVID-19 in the economic sphere also could not be separated from other components. And previously I mentioned some of them, but also in this moment there is probably something what is really unsafe, because due to the medical research we are still not aware when vaccina or whatever in English, I don't know, the medical will
Vaccine.
be vaccine. Yes, the medical services could get that sort of support, and that's also something what is in this moment really making sort of unsafety in the assessments. So it is very difficult to examine how COVID crisis will cause impacts for future defense expenditure, but also it is equally difficult to predict new challenges for defense European cooperation. I find just two scenarios, because there is plenty of them, and I'm sure that my colleagues, as two other speakers, and also our colleague Liliana Brožić, could raise many other scenarios. But at this moment, I tried just to collect it in two scenarios, two potential future scenarios based on the relevant facts and something short research that I made in preparation for this panel. First of all is reducement of the defense budget could affect defense capabilities. That's what actually the first speaker said, and in which way that's really not very easy to assess. Challenging scenario is this is a challenging scenario for a long-term period. You know, it's not something what we are facing now, but if we are not being able to raise capabilities, then we are definitely stick in something what is a sort of gap in the process of raising defense capabilities and doing, especially here in the Western Balkans, doing homeworks from the field of defense sector reforms. Second scenario is related to something what I mentioned previously. Defense is going to be less priority for member states, you know, and if it's less defense and maybe less security on the other side, on who knows which other reflections could be, because someone also previously mentioned that it's due to the created urgent economic needs, and something also for here. We are in this moment expecting what is going to be with the medical situations in the world. Will there be opportunities that for us as a small population will be potential maybe to invest in that and to try to combat all future risks in the field of health, public health. Try to synchronize everything and to make sort of synergy. The other scenario could further undermine the overall cohesion required for the EU to become a serious defense sector, and also it could make a reflection on consolidation within the Euro-Atlantic path, and this is in long term something what we could analyze as a not very optimistic scenario or partly optimistic. Both scenarios could have other previously mentioned other consequences coming from other sides, but I find future EU foreign and security policy as a good base to try to improve or to address more different topics and try to stay in touch with many non-EU countries and to build relations, in addition to, and also to send encouraging messages through the diplomacy, European Union diplomacy, in addition to avoid any sort of not destabilization. It's really hard work but to avoid sort of unstable and unstable situations. When I want just to say my short assessment of the Montenegrin situation, because Montenegro became NATO member, as you know, in 2017, and we are still the EU candidate states starting from 2012 when we started negotiation process. In August this year, we had the parliamentary elections, and after 30 years, it was really high-level political change, because party which was in power for 30 years lost the elections, and the opposition came into the power. That changes arrange new government, of course, which is absolutely different concept from the previous for last 30 years, because this is sort of expert government, which is not politically affiliated, not their members. And it's a team of people who need to try to consolidate the democracy and try to do the best what they can, all of us, in addition to improve capacities to become the EU member as soon as possible. But I must be honest, this is a very complex moment, not just related to political situation in the country, but also it's complicated with the COVID-19 crisis, and also economic consequences which coming together with this. Main goal of the government is that Montenegro very soon, as I said, complete negotiation process, but it's related with two chapters, very important chapters, 23 and 24, related to the rule of law, and something what is really, really crucial for us, not just because of the becoming, yes, that's the goal, but also it's not just to become the member, it's also fulfillment of the standards priority, because I find it as a very, very important part of the process of preparation for EU membership. And with that also coming this part related to the improvement in defense policies, and especially in military capabilities. Our colleague, Dr. Thomas Young, mentioned just something what is really interesting, something what is in my mind for the last 48 hours, how to achieve this, as you said, in creating defense budget to have 1/3 in spending, 1/3 in personnel, 1/3 in investment, infrastructure, and the last third in a totally different field. That's, I would say, something what is challenging, but on the other side, there is a list of priorities which need to be in continuation, part of the processes. That's on the other side. Let's say we have this how to create defense budget, but on the other side, we need to continue with the professionalization of the army, armed forces, and the Ministry of Defense in a whole, modernization, and building civil-military relations, because in this moment, having in mind these political situations, sort of the changes after the elections, I find this gap in the field of civil-military relations very important, not just through the building of policy of integrity within the ministry and armed forces, but also having in mind relations with the citizens and serving to the interests of the citizens, and of course that Army of Montenegro being someone who is going to take part in the processes which are going to be part, only one part, but not less relevant than others, in the processes of democratic consolidations due to the intention to become EU member. Yes, this is absolutely very challenging moment for all of us, not just in the countries of the EU and NATO and let's call it Euro-Atlantic community, but also for all others. And it is probably have reflection on our defense and our security and our future, but I'm sure that the solution existed somewhere, and there is, in my opinion, a lot of potential for optimism. Our colleague Boris Rutter mentioned Europe. It's something what I find is optimistic. European Union finds solutions for many years for many different crises and problems, and I'm sure that we are going all together get the best solution and best plan for our future. Thank you for your attention, and then please don't take me wrong why I just maybe speaking 10 minutes more than it's expected. Thank you, Lilian, and thank you all.
Thank you. You're always all welcome to share some interesting thoughts with us. But I have another question for you. You see, right now there's a German presidency of the EU, and they just published, a new edition of the EDA, and they say, like, the strengthening of the EU and security and defense field is essential. So I would like to know, there are different kinds of countries. There are small ones with a relatively small budget that they do to the defense. Let's say Slovenia is among some of them. And there's a Spain, as I know, it's a little bit below 1% and so on. So the European Union will strengthen their efforts, in this field. They made a card, and there's, a new strategic compass in a way. There's a lot of activities, and the Slovenia will make this presidency in the next year. How do you see, these small countries in this future European Union that's going to be strength and whatever will be? The small countries will cooperate in the same level of the big ones. And I would especially like to hear what Thomas would like to share with us, because he's coming from the States and his view might be very, very different. Maybe Thomas, can you be the first?
I'm happy to discuss this. I could go on forever, I think, but I think what I tell my students here and when I'm consulting abroad, I like to say that when I spent 12 years supporting the Army staff in our system, when I was at the Army War College at the Strategic Studies Institute, we actually were tasked to support the policy and planning branch of the Army headquarters in the Pentagon. And after about 12 years, I came to the realization that defense planning, 95% of the time, the questions you're dealing with in defense planning is not what to buy, but it's what to cut. And it's even in the large US system, the questions every day, somebody would come in, we need to find another $200 million by 5 o'clock. And this is, with a defense budget that's baked 3 years in advance. This is inevitable. And I would suggest that, every country look very, very hard at what you're spending your money on. I'm publishing a piece in Problems in Post-Communism in the next few months, looking at the Romanian Defense Institution. And I'm making the argument that, given the size of the stated modernization programs, and these are all over 100 million euros, it's about 12 billion euros for major acquisition projects without the submarines. The acquisition budget every year of the current Romanian defense budget is approximately 5 billion euros. And of that, about 1 billion euros goes to modernization. So, the math doesn't work. And so the argument that I'm using in this essay, compliments, I was able to spend a lot of time in Romania last year talking to a lot of people throughout the system, is, you have the case to go to the Ministry of Finance and to request a national loan, but to buy to modernize the armed forces. But I mean, for you to make the case strongly to the Ministry of Finance, because that's who really matters in parliamentary governments, that you're going to have to show them that every lei you're spending on defense is being used wisely. And so you need to look really hard at, why do you have 50 military army bases? Why do you have all of this infrastructure? Why do you have this huge educational system, but you don't do training? You don't do collective training, or you're only starting to do collective training now. So I mean, there are all of these questions that defense planners need to ask of the system, and they need to convince their political leadership that we're not wasting money on things we don't need to waste money on. Or, we're doing this because we absolutely need to have the redundancy. We have determined, for military reasons, we just have to have it. And then you make the case. But I think all of us, to include the United States, needs to look really hard at what we're spending the money on and why we're doing it. And to look at those assumptions that we oftentimes just accept. In the United States, we have 2 bases that train helicopter pilots. Why? Well, there are political reasons, okay, but ask the questions, what you're spending the money on, because at least then you have a chance in the normal business fighting our common enemy. Our common enemy is our respective ministers of finance. At least then you have the ability to make a stronger argument than you have now. Those are my, off the cuff.
Maybe some short thoughts from Boris and Olivera, and I have a question there from attendee.
If I may just say something about this. Look, I'm looking at the chart, and it's well-known data that, compared to US, which has one main battle tanks model, EU has 17 different types of main battle tanks. It has 27 different types of howitzers in the EU countries, and so on, not to mention destroyers and the Navy and so on. No, discrepancy is huge. So in terms of what EDA is doing and this initiative from America or Germany, it's basically what, and I hope I'm not revealing any secrets here, it was kind of agreement between big countries in Europe to invest more in research and development and reduce the number of this equipment. So the Germans will mostly focus on land component, and France and Italy will focus on maritime component investment. The principle is that if Europe is using the common funding and all the resources that they can collect to finance research and development, acquisition of new equipment, standardization, it will help also the smaller country which cannot afford investing their budget, which is always limited, let's face it. And it's, to paraphrase the Professor Young, 1/3 to maintenance, 1/3 to OEM, and so we only have 1/3. So what to do with 1/3? Not we have 3/3. So this will help smaller countries with the limited of the budget. They cannot finance all this high-tech equipment and all the hardware, but rather to join partnership with the companies that they can develop research. So the potential for the smaller country will be that invest jointly, and the EU principle, it's always jointly, not one country, but few countries, jointly to develop the equipment that we all need. There will be the same equipment. So the theme in the Europe Defense is always how to reduce the number of different types of equipment that we use in all countries, which is, and all we have a problem with maintaining this and keep it in operation and so forth. So this is the initiative of EDA. I see it in this slide because this agreement was done a few years ago, as I remember, in the EU level, that big countries will lead the way through EDA to finally have some, more sense about the military investment. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any comment from Olivera?
Very shortly, it's not kind of comment, it's more like thesis, Could you imagine if countries which have capabilities and good budget, not small as a country as Montenegro and Slovenia, if they are facing in this challenging time sort of risks, we could say, or threats for the cutting the budget and trying to create the best balance between the needs and investments. Could you imagine how it could be, could have reflections on the budget of the countries, small countries, non-EU countries, which are just in the process of modernizations, such as Montenegro, and Professor Young mentioned at the beginning. I'm glad that we are going to be able, I hope after this, maybe to discuss in brief together, to exchange ideas, and your knowledge is really important for me. But could you imagine how is that for the countries which are in the process of modernizations, buying equipments and everything, and just are coming the process of paying credits and to, you know, just in the phase and need to improve capacities even more and try to improve everything that I mentioned before. And in that phase is we are getting overall globally this sort of health crisis, which with many consequences, which have an impact. So thank you, and it was really my pleasure to listen these two very interesting discussions, and believe me, this is a really good opportunity for me to get some new info and possibilities for try to find possibilities for our future cooperation. Thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you to you again. What I would like to stress here is, and I believe it's extremely important, something is a theory. How do you develop a theory, and what the EU does on the field of common defense and security policy. But the main point is, when you try to do anything in real life in this field, you need a lot of time, a lot of effort. All the processes are really long, and you can't be so responsive as you would like to be. And we have a question from our one attendee, and I would like to read it. The question is from Dr. Damian Strutzel, and he says like this: in my opinion, a common fight against the pandemic is equal to a common cyber defense, and we are aware that we need to increase defense spending. There is a general standpoint that together we fight the common threat and invest more, but in practice, it is almost the opposite. Thus, the pandemic has not increased spending in the defense sector, but has decreased, notwithstanding the increasing risk and threats to national and international security. Hence the question, how to turn theory into practice, both nationally and internationally? Who's going to be the first? As I can see, Boris is preparing to say something.
No, but I didn't get the question right. Could you repeat
the question? Is how to turn theory into practice, both nationally and internationally.
Well, that's why we have politicians, right? Politicians, they need to do this, their job, and to turn this into the practice. Right? We experienced in the, as I mentioned earlier, phase of the pandemic, how the politicians steer away from this. It was a panic, but this was the lessons learned, what should or shouldn't be done. But seriously, we have politicians to do this, to make it policies happen in the real time. So not that we professionals fight for our cause or start to explain why it exists and what to do with it, but it should be obvious that this domain, it has to be materialized in some way. And that's why we have a structure, partition countries, multinational corporations, so how they are doing these different questions, though, or are they succeeding this, or have other agendas? But in theory, or maybe that's why. So basically, if we would have different types of politicians in power while the pandemic emerged, or while when another cyber attack will emerge, that's make a difference. We can do our job, but then again, in this Western part, the politicians are those who has to make policies into laws and practice and make it happen.
Thank you. But now just recently, we had two different situations that they really surprised us. One was a migration crisis, and now we have COVID. So there's as I believe, there is a great opportunity that we're going to have something that's going to surprise us, let's say in the next 4 or 5 years. So how can be prepared to something that you don't know it's going to happen? How to predict the unpredictable? You know,
You can't.
it's quite hard. It's quite hard to make a plans and everything and to realize something and make coordination or whatever they're going to do on a political level or on theoretical level, but it's going to be quite hard to be prepared to something that is unexpected. And I guess that there's going to be plenty of unexpected, especially if I have in mind, you know, the weather circumstances, the many different things that are happening here, there, and maybe there should be more different roundtables, conferences, and things like that in this field. I believe that right now, or maybe for past 5 years, those kind of events are not enough. That there should be more. But this is not something that make us sure that we're going to find, you know, some solution for the future, because we might be surprised again. So, do you have any ideas? Like
Well,
what
if I
to
may
think
just
to-
add, I'm convinced that, you know, the next crisis, it's around the corner. It's not that something that you, I mean, it's not takes a wild prediction. It's, I mean, you can be saved in your predictions to look, developing security area in Mediterranean, what happened around in neighborhood of EU, as you speak, it's boiling. It's not something that you can dismiss like, well, it won't happen, something. So it should not be an excuse that we are living in a bubble and we don't see anything. So the thing is that the professionals in intelligence community, academic community, well, most we can predict something. It's not that they can surprise us. Oh, virus was surprising. But even if you see the viruses, it was a series of viruses always happen. It's not just some, you know, planet come to, you know, asteroid hit the Earth. Even with this we can predict now. What I'm saying is that, of course, we cannot be certain, but we can assume and predict and be prepared in our institution. The problem is that if those who need to, as I said, make policies into practice, which means the politicians, government elected, and so on with them, they don't do it, and the priorities are different. Other agenda, ups and downs in some kind of politics, locals, and fight. So if you see that the terrain in the last decade, we go from one crisis to another, one issue, another, basically just political, ideological, or whatever, but it's not substantial. So what I'm saying is the professional community, which means intelligence, military, police, all this, they can do their job, and they raise the question to the level to seek, let's say, response. But there has to be another side that needs to respond. So we have to blame them if we didn't prepare. If we are not prepared, not let's say us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Thomas, can I ask you now? You have a long expertise in being a professional and scientist and expert, and you do warn and emphasize and discuss about the problematic topics in the field of security and defense. What's your experience? Are you heard enough?
You know, initially I didn't quite understand the point our colleague was making, but I went into chat and I looked at it and I thought harder about it, and I think he's making a very good point. Because initially I didn't see the connection between cyber and COVID. I mean, cyber is here. This is just a new domain that we will have to spend money on. My fear is, as a defense planner, I don't know how much is enough, given the fact that it's almost like modern communications. You can never spend enough money on it. But I take his point about the unpredictability. And I guess, you know, if I'm sitting in Podgorica in Minister Injak's, you know, seat, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm now Minister of Defense of this country, you know, what is it I have to do? And a minister has to decide on priorities. And I would say, you know, we cannot predict the future. I think it's Yogi Berra said, you know, predicting the future is hard because it's the future. So it's circular. So I don't worry so much about that. But as a defense planner, what I would say is, what is it that I need to have irrespective of events? Okay, I need to have a disciplined force. Now we have professionals for the most part. Okay, so it has to be a disciplined force. I need to have command and control. I need a units, platforms that respond to government policy priorities. I know I will have to be able to, I need to be able to support that force in all of its different manifestations. So that means logistics. You know, what I'm getting down to at the end of the day, yeah, you need modern capabilities. We all need modern capabilities, but I keep going back to this operations and maintenance. You can't have any of this. The command and control, the discipline force, the predictability of being able to deliver whatever it is the armed forces are expected to deliver, be it humanitarian assistance, be it, you know, peacekeeping, be it, you know, defending your borders or going to war and delivering lethality and surviving. You can't do any of this without training. Hard individual leadership and collective training. And what I see in Central and Eastern Europe, and I've written about this, so this is no big secret, and this is coming from me, and you see on my screen, I have a PhD. I see that education has been replacing training in many countries. And so we have very well educated soldiers, sailors, and airmen, but they don't train, not to the levels that we have in old NATO. And training is expensive because you're buying consumables, and consumables, you have to pay international market prices, POL, petroleum oil lubricants, batteries, practice munition. You know, it doesn't matter. You know, you're paying hard currency for this, which is why many countries don't like to spend money on O&M, because they just see it as money being, you know, what do I get for it? Well, you get the disciplined force that can respond to a border crisis, COVID, or do whatever else the government wants you to be able to do. So my continuous plea is, you know, don't ignore that training and operations budget, because that's really the blood in the body. You take that away and you have a corpse. You don't have an army anymore. Comments,
okay,
please.
thank you very much, Tom. You see the time is running. We have to finish in 16 minutes. So I would give a final thoughts to Olivera, and we will finish then. We can hear you, Olivera.
Here, do you hear me now?
It's okay,
Yes.
it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Professor Young. You were very specific. You responded very specific and raised very interesting questions. Something what is, let's say, partially for the expenditure for the crisis, at impact of the COVID crisis on expenditures. You responded in the part of civil-military relations as a crucial components of our work here now, in addition to fulfill these priorities. But previously mentioned, I just wanted to agree with all three of you. Yes, this is difficult to predict, but also for global security, there were many studies written, for example, at the beginning or at the end of 20th century, at the beginning 21st century. But let's say, I'm not sure how much of that we were aware, especially before 9/11, and also some other crises, economic and which happened in Europe 12 years ago, then some other problems and risks which we are facing now. There is also, like Lilian mentioned, migrant crisis, but there is also two very specific risks. One is partially mentioned in many analyses. That's sort of hybrid. Someone like to take discourse hybrid warfare, but I would say hybrid risks, which are something I would say totally unfamiliar with most of us, and in my opinion, not very easy to predict. And another one is related to climate changes globally, and I would say it is probably going to be the task of the army of small countries in the future to raise capacities to be able to make sort of tasks from the field of crisis management and solving and providing to citizens the best what they can, that they be responsible for the to help citizens to improve situations and to be used like here in Montenegro during the crisis, even now after lockdown, especially during the lockdown, but even now we are using military forces to finish and to complete many tasks related to the crisis management in COVID-19 crisis. So yes, there is plenty of possibilities to spread theory and practice. It's just important to be brave enough to be able to respond fast and to use all these modern mechanisms which we have at national level, but also on international level, international security level, just to combine it and try to make any sort of plans in advance for early warning on and many other concepts. So there is plenty of thoughts, yes, but I just want to express my gratitude to Professor Young and to also dear colleague Boris from Slovenia. It was a really pleasure for me just to talk to you and to share ideas and thoughts. As I can see, there is a lot of different topics and fields where we can cooperate together, and I'm really happy if there be any chance and possibility just to be part of your team and to work on the both national of our countries and international interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So because we do not have any questions now and there are just 2 minutes left, I would like to thank to all of you. You were great guests. I'm really happy to have you here. And you know, our discussion was, as far as I'm concerned, very, very fruitful. And I look forward to any kind of different cooperation, coordination, or whatever the future might bring. So thank you all, and thank you very much for all the attendees that they were here today with us. They didn't mention or comment a lot, but maybe next time there's going to be another opportunity, and they're very welcome to join us again. Thank you so much to everyone. Bye.
Hvala, dobry dzień.
Prosím, na svídanie. Ciao.